Welcome to our Futures Project. We'll introduce ourselves and get started. I'm Justin Watkins.
Caitlin Moreno and
Savannah Gross.
Abby Reese.
Wyatt Gust.
Shizuka Sato.
In discussing how gender inequality in Pakistan affects their economy, we must first mention what principles contribute to a country having a strong economy in the first place. An increase in the capital stock, advances in technology, and improvement in the quality and level of literacy are considered to be the principal causes of economic growth. Sadly, Pakistan is far behind in all three of these categories, especially in national literacy rates. Women, in particular, are segregated from men in almost every aspect of life and have few opportunities to get an education or learn to read at all. This negatively impacts the amount of qualified bodies that can work and stimulate economic growth in the country. It's believed by some extreme Islamic groups that women should not be educated at all, and that their duty solely rests in the home and in taking care of their husbands. While many hold on to these traditions and beliefs, the men of Pakistan must eventually realize that the progress and hope of their country in all economic affairs greatly depends on the way they treat and educate their women. With women making up almost half of the population, improvements and laws must be made to allow women to become more involved in government and business affairs.
So we know that gender inequality is a very prevalent part of the Pakistani economy. But why? What are the root causes of that gender inequality? There are several, and it affects other parts of the country as well. The two big ones are culture and religion, because they are both extremely patriarchal in Pakistan. You can see here the weight of it. Women suffer discrimination because of this, and it's in every part of their lives because of that. There are several effects that this gender gap causes, several effects of this gender gap. A lower gender gap creates economic growth, while a larger gap prevents economic growth. It also prevents child mortality, fertility, and expansion of education for the next generation. And we see here too that why we need to reduce that gender gap. It's a basic human right. It gets freedom from male control, better health care, economic growth, and it'll improve everybody's lives.
Gender inequality is an issue that can also be found in the realm of education in Pakistan. This inequality has become increasingly present in the last 2 decades, especially with the growing influence of the Taliban. But just as military groups such as the Taliban have become an increasingly present force in the war on female education, advocates for the other side, such as Malala Yousafzai, an advocate for female education who we learned about in this course while we were reading I Am Malala, have also made their voices known as well. Here are some statistics that help to illustrate just how large the education gap is for males and females in Pakistan. Out of the 49.5 million illiterate adults in Pakistan, 2/3 of them are women. Half of all out-of-school children are female, which ends up being about 4.5 million girls. The ratio of girls to boys in primary school currently is 8 to 10. And while the primary enrollment rate has risen in recent decades, reaching about 63%, the enrollment rate for female students is still 19% below that of male students.
There are some improvements made in Pakistan now. I found 2 of them from the article that I read. The first is the work positions for women. Recently, Pakistani women started to place in non-traditional fields of work, such as the armed forces, commissioned officers. The second is that urban women are more educated and active, knowing their right. We also acknowledge that the women in rural areas tend to stay home. It is not an easy problem. The movement on the gender equality is mainly started by international agencies and not by women in Pakistan. The government tries to meet for the international standards, but the mindset of people, especially men, cannot be easily changed.
In the 1920s, women were given the right to vote in America. Nearly 30 years later, in 1947, Pakistani women were given the right to vote. But still, it's not traditional for these women to vote. And a reason I think is because they're afraid of the Taliban. Studies show that only about 44% of women vote in Pakistan. Now, the Taliban have a significant power and pose a threat to the people living in Pakistan. They can be dangerous and exercise their perceived right to enforce Sharia law, even though Sharia law is not supported by the government. In Sharia law, women aren't allowed to leave the house without permission from their father or their husband. And this could be a contribution why it's very difficult for women to study and become educated. It's a fact that women are awarded more degrees, and as most of us know, here in America, it's a literal law that children must be enrolled in school and must attend.
And this is just a quick final statement on the essence of the change that is needed.